Good morning and welcome to Health Matters with the Medicine Center Pharmacy. I'm your pharmacist, Paul White. We're very glad you joined us this morning. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Mercy Medical Center, Studio Arts and Glass, and, of course, our technical producer, J.D. DeAngelis. This morning in the studio with me is Brad White, a compounding pharmacist and the manager of our New Philadelphia store, and our very special guest, Bryce Wylde. And he is in Canada, I believe, alternative health expert, founding partner, Your Nutrients, City TV health expert, and medical advisor, Dr. Oz Show. Today we're discussing healthy brains. Good morning, Bryce, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning. The brain is made up of specialized cells called neurons. You've got 86 billion of them. They work together to process and transmit electrical and chemical messages that enable you to function. Their magic lies in their ability to help connect each other to form neural networks, just like people do to form social networks.
So, Bryce, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, guys. Well, I've been in clinical practice for about 20 years now in the Toronto, Canada area, as you identified, and I've really taken a special interest in functional medicine. We don't like the term alternative anymore because really there's just simply best medicine, and that involves nutrition, supplementation, botanical medicine, things like herbs, and the application of genomics and other leveraging of scientific evidence-based laboratory analysis. And often we'll use pharmaceuticals, and surgical intervention in a clinical practice. So all of that together. I've also authored a number of books on the topic of natural medicine. I run a production company on the side that's produced dozens of micro-documentaries that essentially feature ingredient companies, and these are from all around the globe, and these companies manufacture the raw materials that supply consumer-facing natural health products. And more recently, joined the scientific advisory board for Brain Armor with a focus on brain health, and one of the major impetus for that was the diagnosis of my own mother. She received a diagnosis almost 2 years ago now for Alzheimer's. So my practice took a real hard right turn, and I became very, very focused on the brain and the nervous system. Even the World Health Organization has said that in the next few years, along with obesity, brain degeneration, cognitive decline, these will probably be the two most common maladies that we face. So I'm personally on a mission to help folks improve what I call brain span.
So what's your role at Brain Armor?
My focus is really innovations and education. For a long time now, I've had an opportunity to be heavily involved in media in North America. As you alluded to earlier, I sit on the advisory board for the Dr. Oz Show, done a lot of work with him, a lot of morning television show news flow around North America to educate folks on improving their health, most recently improving their brain. I've also been tasked with conceiving of and creating a line extension as well as a brand extension at Brain Armor. So that is to say, formulating new products. Also blessed to be working on the scientific advisory board on clinical trials and working with Dr. Julian Bales, helping to educate the public on what they should do to keep a healthy brain. Dr. Bales, of course, is chairman of the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery at North Shore. And that's in Chicago, the Neurological Institute. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Concussion. He was actually played by Alec Baldwin. His expertise is in the diagnosis and surgical management of all kinds of neurological diseases, so learning from him on the daily. So a lot of different roles, and they're all very exciting.
So what are the different sources of omega-3s available in the supplement market today?
Oh, that's a great question. So first of all, if you'll let me indulge the backdrop, people are really confused, I believe, about, even what omega-3s are, where they come from. It's well talked about. It's one of the most researched, evidence-based ingredients, actually second only to aspirin in the world. Over 21,000 human clinical trials and publications have been made for omega-3s. But as it relates to the supplement market, first of all, there's all types of sources in our diet. So this is stuff that can come from nuts, seeds, plants like echium and ahi flower. Those are actual ingredients and supplements on the market as well. And seaweed, algae, we use that at Brain Armor, algal, and we'll perhaps talk about why, all the reasons why we source vegan. Fish, of course, has some of the highest levels, and also grass-fed beef. But by and large, when people think omega-3s, they think about fish oil. But in this day and age, the bottom line with our SAD diet, SAD, and that stands for Standard American Diet, we simply aren't achieving a high enough amount of these omega-3s. So there's all sorts of omega-3s available in the supplement market, to your question, which include flax, which include fish. There's a lot of vegan sources, algal sources. There's even plant and seed sources, as I alluded to, called echium and ahi flower. That sounds like sushi. It's not. Ahi flower is simply a weed. Bugliocytes is the Latin name. So you can get omega-3s from all kinds of sources. However, and this is something I hope that we'll clarify today, there's really only one best source, and that is, in fact, as it turns out, algal. It's very, very sustainable, and it's very, very useful for the body in the format that it's already in, as it pertains to the most bioavailable or readily available to the body.
Okay, so what about our body? Does it make omega-3s?
You're right. Another really great question. So omega-3s are otherwise also considered essential fatty acids, and that's because specifically they are essential to get from our diet. Our body can't make it on its own. So it turns out that based in genetics, some of us are actually better than others, but at the end of the day, we don't really make enough of a particular essential fatty acid known as DHA, as well as EPA by simply consuming, what we get in our diet. In fact, consuming more omega-3 had a huge consequence in the evolution of the size and the function of our brain. This is only about 50,000 years ago where we actually began to cook, to use fire. Allowing us to digest outside of our body and allowing us to do a lot more than just forage all day, hours of the day. So growing this bigger brain was actually less of a liability. But simultaneously, and this is where it's really interesting, there was a mutation in a gene called FADS2, FADS2 we refer to this as. And this gene encodes for a really crucial enzyme that's necessary to convert omega-3s in the body. This enzyme's called alpha-60-saturase. It's critical for brain function. However, it still doesn't do a good enough job on its own, drawing from, nuts and seeds. We really have to eat quite a lot of fish to get the optimal levels of these omega-3 essential fatty acids. In this day and age, again, that SAD diet that we're consuming, we're way over consuming grains and pro-inflammatory foods, refined carbohydrates, and we refer to this, of course, as the starch and the sugars, cakes, cookies, muffins, overconsumption of breads, etc. That's shoving us over toward an omega-6 saturation in our systems, and that's actually pro-inflammatory, where the omega-3s, EPA and DHA, are anti-inflammatory. So our body doesn't make omega-3s effectively. However, about 50,000 years ago, we did have this gene mutation in our population, which allowed us to do a little bit better a job. And in this day and age, we kind of reverted back to a situation where we not only don't get enough in our diet, but we overconsume something competitive to the benefit of omega-3, and that's the omega-6. So actually, historically, evolutionarily, we used to be more of a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. In this day, we're 26-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, pushing ourselves into what we affectionately refer to as pro-inflammatory. Inflammation is a medical buzz term of the day for a good reason. It really is what causes, at the molecular level, all disease is inflammation. So that's the short of it anyway.
Well, there's a lot of news in the press lately. I mean, there was just a national newsletter from AARP that went out about a week and a half ago that talked about chronic inflammation being the root of all disease, possibly. And there's certainly a lot of things that we can do to address that. Now, you mentioned the different types of omega fatty acids. Can you talk a little bit about the different types of omega-3 fatty acids?
Right. So, there's a number of them. The ones who I think we really should pay attention to are about 4. And it's a biochemical cascade. Essentially, it's stepwise in all the cells of our body that we take an omega-3 called ALA, alpha-linoleic acid. ALA then in the body turns into SDA, stearidonic acid. And then that turns into EPA, and then eventually EPA turns into DHA. Once again, though, the body doesn't do a great job. It does a little bit of this converting. Women actually do a little bit better than us for that matter. But ALA into SDA, into EPA, to DHA, those are four essential fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids. DHA, ultimately think of that as brain juice. That is the most important brain omega-3 essential fatty acid. But the biggest difference, essentially, between all of these is carbon chain length. So this is going back to biochemistry. The amount of carbon Cs in the particular chains, the longer that they are, and so this desaturase enzyme I alluded to earlier, this is responsible for essentially sticking carbon chains onto these omega-3 fatty acids to make them longer. The longer they are, DHA being the longest, the healthier it is to include into the membrane of various cells, including neurons, the thinking cells within our brain. And so this cascade, this enzyme production upstream from ALA all the way to DHA, that varies in folks, with some of us genetically, but our goal is to get as much DHA into our systems, into our brain as possible to dampen the inflammation you just spoke to, as well as to increase nerve-to-nerve conduction, that is the speaking of, between themselves, and the integrity, protecting, literally arming our brain.
Okay, Bryce, before the break, you were giving us a breakdown of the important omega-3 fatty acids that work in our body and can possibly be converted if we have the right coenzymes to do it. Are we going to talk a little bit about DHA and brain juice and how it's important?
Oh, absolutely. Let's get into it. So DHA downstream, of course, as we talked about, as just alluded to, so furthest downstream, docosahexaenoic acid. This is the most important brain nutrient scientists have discovered, literally. It fuels the cells. So think of the cells of our body. Red blood cells are the most sort of commonly thought of, illustrations we've got in our head as these cylindrical, sort of half, circular cells with a membrane around them to keep inside things like, iron and oxygen carrying capacity, hemoglobin, et cetera. So all cells of your body, whether it's a red blood cell, skin cells, or even a neuron in the brain, have a membrane. And that membrane is there purposely to allow things in and outside of the cell. The membrane is made up of fats, phospholipids, they're called. And they've got a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic end. One side doesn't like water, one side likes water. And that's how the cell ultimately keeps integrity. Our cells really require a high percentage, in particular neurons, brain active thinking cells, require quite a high percentage of DHA, an omega-3 fatty acid, as well as EPA, known to sort of quell and manage inflammation. But DHA and that integrity, high percentage of DHA in the brain, we refer to affectionately as brain juice, is going to allow neurons to connect and communicate with each other better. We're fatheads. Our brains are made of 60% or more fat, and the most important fat is that DHA.
All right, can you tell us how Brain Armor's production process differs from other products on the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So the differentiator, and I referred to this a little earlier on in the first segment, is that most importantly, we're derived from algae, not fish. So we're an algal oil. And here's what's key to understand. So fish do not enhance EPA and DHA. They ingest this from algae to begin with. So what they do is bioaccumulate it. So this is part of their food chain. They consume the algae, and then they saturate their bodies, their meat, with EPA and DHA. And what we know is to get the purest the most potent form of EPA and DHA, we can actually simply go straight to the source by bypassing further processing that fish undergo. And we can acquire these healthy fatty acids from the same natural route that fish do, right, from algae, and process this in very controlled environments. When it comes to fish, we're a little concerned this day and age with bioaccumulation of other things like dioxins and furans and heavy metals. These are all quite toxic, and so there requires a purification process when it comes to fish before their oils can be sold. Often this process involves so much converting and reconverting of their oils that we're concerned about things like rancidity, not even to mention sustainability. So here's the other important thing, is that during the fermentation process that our product undergoes, our algal cells are only fed pure nutrients of certified quality. So our omega-3s come from these microalgae fermenters. So imagine these massive fermenters that kind of look like what you'd find in the beer industry. And they rely on this pure, these natural ingredients so that the finished product is 100% free of toxins, okay, unlike the fish oil industry. And all components that we're using, this is in the mix, it's very simple. They need a little bit of energy, a little bit of food, and some care, and they just blast out all kinds of DHA and EPA. We know that basically everything that goes into the algae, so that we can be very confident about everything that comes out. So essentially, Brain Armor is all of that. It's pure, it's sustainable, because that's important. We have to consider sustainability. We're not raking the ocean floor for this algae, because that's also an unsustainable process. Vegan and keto friendly at the same time. It's all GMP, good manufacturing practices, incredibly evidence-based ingredients. I mean, this is a DSM ingredient with many, many hundreds of human clinical trials. And then we have a very clean label. So another differentiator is there's no sugar, obviously no gluten, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, very, very clean labels. So that would be ultimately what how we differ. And we're also, by the way, very, very importantly, we're NSF. And NSF certification in particular for sport is very, very important, because this means that it's actually safe for athletes who are constantly tested for any impurities or sport enhancers. They can feel comfortable taking this product as well.
Well, I have to say, as a consumer of the product, I am amazed, because I've never been one that has enjoyed the texture or the flavor of traditional fish oils in the oil form. But I'm really impressed with the oil formulation that Brain Armor has, and the taste. And there's no fishy aftertaste. There's no indigestion a couple hours later that you feel like you're still tasting what you consumed. I'm really impressed with the product, and I've been using it now for about a month and a half since we learned about it. And I'm excited to share it with our listeners and to have it be in our pharmacies, so that our pharmacists can have a great source to recommend, especially because I think our number one complaint that we hear from other patients is, oh, well, I tried fish oil, but I always burp back up the fish and it tastes disgusting.
Well, you bring up such an important point. Compliance is everything. I mean, I've been using essential fats, omega-3s, EPA, DHA in my clinical practice for 20 years, and I'm right there with you. I can make recommendation, but it's the age-old adage, you can lead a horse to water but can't force them to drink. If somebody's not going to take something, it's certainly not going to do anything for them outside of their body. And so we pride ourselves in that amazing taste, flavor, texture, quite easy to get back. Here's a trick. Because anyone, as I know you guys know, can experience repeating. Sometimes it's simply the ineffectiveness of a gastroesophageal valve, the sphincter that's supposed to keep stomach contents down. So we have both liquid and encapsulations. Folks can easily take our capsules, but if they have this predisposition to repeating, it's a simple measure of freezing their capsules, their Brain Armor capsules. Once you put those in a freezer, once you consume them, they will not release in your stomach, but rather later on in your duodenum, first section of your intestine. And when they release there, it's impossible to repeat. So yes, we're very, very tasty. But even if you few folks may repeat. Even if you repeat our product, it's cool. it's quite tasty, dare I say, on the second experience. But this is one easy way to do it: freeze the capsules and ultimately avoid the repeating in the first place.
All right, Bryce, can we talk about the omega-3 index?
Oh, I'm excited to talk about that. This is something that I've been using in a clinical practice for over 10 years easily now, led by some of the work by Dr. Bill Harris. So the index, in summary, really is simply a test that you can take to assess your omega-3 status. So we've established, of course, today that that's an incredibly important level to have, these essential omega-3s in our blood, in our membranes of all of our cells of our body, our neurons. But looking at this, all you need is a finger stick to draw a drop of blood. So unlike getting a cholesterol test or having a thyroid blood test with your family doctor, you don't need a doctor to obtain an omega-3 test. You can do this on your own at home. In fact, if you even ask a doctor, most of them don't even think to test your omega-3 levels during, an annual visit, even though, as we've established and discussed, folks in North America don't get a sufficient amount of these nutrients from the diet alone. So the omega-3 index is really simply a measure of the amount of the EPA and the DHA, that super important brain juice, in your blood, specifically in the red blood cell membranes. So, for example, this is literally looking under a microscope. If you have 64 essential fatty acids in a cell membrane, and 3 of them are EPA and 3 are DHA, then ultimately you do the quick math, cowboy math, and you have an omega-3 index of about 4.6%. So that's the index number. That's what's done in the laboratory to analyze your percentage. So when you take an omega-3 index test, it gives you this percent where 8% or higher, and this is really what I want to drive home for folks, 8% or higher is ideal. However, most of my patients ultimately come in and around 6% or below on their baseline. And unfortunately, in North America, the average is even lower. Most people are at about 4% or below. And that's the highest risk zone. So being in that highest risk zone, this is where we're going to sort of summarize it all as it relates to a direct correlation to our health. That highest risk zone translates to 90% higher risk of things like sudden cardiovascular death, and as it pertains to correlations to cognitive decline and overall general immune dysfunction, brain health, et cetera. So what we want to do is achieve a percent of 8% and higher. And it's also important to note that only EPA and DHA omega-3s will raise this index. So we talked a little earlier about the different forms. You take something like ALA, found in sources like flax or chia seed, and they generally have little, if any, impact on this omega-3 index. We also alluded to SDA, and that's another type of omega-3 a little higher up after ALA in the biochemical chain. But this SDA found in things like echium and ahi flower products, they take forever, if they ever do, to boost the EPA and generally don't do anything for DHA, which is, again, the most important brain-healthy omega shown to prevent cognitive decline, enhance focus, attention, alertness, concentration, IQ, all kinds of things. So no matter how healthy you are, bottom line, you should always know your omega-3 index number, and you're trying to achieve an 8% or higher for optimal brain health.
I'm sure you're the expert to ask about this, but when you speak about cognitive ability, it seems like there is some significant research that backs up the DHA EPA support to help us. How can we make a difference in our cognitive ability just simply by looking at our diet and considering a supplementation of a product like an EPA DHA product?
Right. So loaded question, but I love it. I think what we have to do is first visit what is cognitive ability. And certainly it's not just, your IQ ranking or your recall ability. For that matter, I've recently been interviewing what are known as memory champions. These are memory athletes. Didn't even know until recently these guys existed, but they have legitimate games in which they are challenging their brains on a regular basis and training their brains for that matter, but to become the best at recall. But it's simply not. Cognitive ability is not just recall, it's not just IQ, it's a whole bunch of other things. So, what is it? And what do we do to improve it? So first of all, neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is the generation of new neurons in various brain regions. Neuroplasticity is our ability to have a plastic or malleable brain, and that is to say, nerve connections are constantly being made and they're constantly being paired back, learning things, unlearning things. And then to increase neurotrophins, these are a type of hormone found in our brain that increases neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. So ultimately, what we want with a healthy diet and lifestyle is we want to boost all of these factors. And the good news is that we can. So I'm always touting, things like consuming more healthy spices, mustard, for example, a teaspoon of that every day, curcumin. These have ingredients in them that boost neurotrophic activity. Lots of green tea. I'm drinking some right now with EGCG, very, very potent antioxidant. We know about cardiovascular exercise, HIIT. We're meant as humans to push, pull, jump, squat, lift. These are things we don't do enough of. That's one of those important things to boost brain activity and cognitive ability. I'm a huge advocate of taking contrast showers. That's turning the dial really, really hot, almost to a feverish point. You don't want to burn yourself, of course. And then spend a minute on the opposite end of the dial, freezing cold. You do that back and forth for a bit. That's actually going to boost these neurotrophins, which is going to boost neurogenesis and boost neuroplasticity. So all kinds of things. We talk about sleep hygiene, keeping a really dark, cool room. Turns out that is key for lymphatics. So we know about lymphatics draining toxins out of our system in the periphery, but there's no lymph in your brain. They're called glymph or glial cells. These are the non-thinking neurons that help to clean up the mess. They only really work at night in deep sleep when it's cool and dark, and getting that not just hours clocked on the pillow, but deep, restful sleep. And growing and optimizing social networks. So, being social, that helps us. Practicing good oral hygiene, turns out. Minimizing P. gingivalis. So P. gingivalis, the same stuff that causes cavities and periodontal disease, has been found and linked to, into patients. This is post-mortem, looking at brain samples, is found to be highly correlated with Alzheimer's. But probably the most important thing, this is when we want to come full circle, is supplementing with DHA and EPA. So DHA has been known to boost certain neurotrophins, to boost neuroplasticity, and to boost neurogenesis. So all of these things, probably most importantly, something so easy everyone can do, to supplement with Brain Armor, is going to affect, and in a positive way, cognitive ability. That's what it's about.
So, can you share some background on the Living Brain Project?
Yeah, the Living Brain Project. So, thelivingbrainproject.com is a place where folks can go to learn more about this online. This is an incredibly well done, N of 1 over time study at arm's length internally at Brain Armor, actually led by our business director, Nick Pilley, and I have more recently become involved when I joined the team. It keeps growing with new participants every week. So itself is quite living. And in this study, 100%, this is where it'll shock you, 100% of the participants who supplemented with Brain Armor, the omega-3 DHA to EPA 2-to-1 ratio, for their age, the amount that's appropriate for their age, for 90 days, 3 months, demonstrated an increase in the omega-3 index, that percent, and a significant percent. Even those who are actually already supplementing with different sources of omega-3s prior to the start of the study. So we have a partnership with the NFL alumni, all kinds of pro athletes, as well as executives and professionals and even lay people joined the study. But similar results are, of course, true for other two health outcomes, and these are important beyond just the omega-3 index, and that's the ratio. Remember at the top in the first segment we talked about this disproportionate ratio between omega-6 and omega-3. Well, that becomes improved in the Living Brain Project, as well as the ratio of AA, or arachidonic acid, to EPA. So that ratio represents directly inflammation in the body. So what's the Living Brain Project doing? Over a course of 3 months, it's boosting omega-3 index to optimal levels. It's improving the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, and it's dampening this burden of inflammation that most of us carry. And It gets even more impressive. So in this particular study, 96.4 or so percent of the participants demonstrated improvements in this ratio. So that's the numbers. 91% demonstrated significant improvements of the inflammatory index. And again, we routinely see athletes, professionals, executives, everyday folks who go from 5% or less danger zone to well above 8%, and that's where you want to be. In fact, one pharmacist recently boosted his omega-3 index 56% only after 28 days. So you don't have to go 90 days. That's where we took the project, but in only 28 days, this particular pharmacist, N of 1, just wanted to see what his results were already. 56%. That's incredibly statistically significant. So folks can learn more at thelivingbrainproject.com.
So here's the big question. How safe are your products?
And it's probably the most important question, right? So first and foremost, safety, efficacy. And safety always comes even before efficacy. Safety, very. So it's one area that we pride ourselves as it pertains to our ingredients, safety and purity for that matter, and they kind of go hand in hand. All products have GRAS. They're generally recognized as safe, of course, but we also have NSF. And as I alluded to earlier, NSF sports certification on our Pro formula. This is for athletes. So we go literally above and beyond, and it is from the proverbial farm to finish or the fermentation process to end product. That is incredibly transparent. We have full control of all the ingredients. And of course, again, I'm just going to go back to the studies done on, DHA, EPA to lend from the 21,000 plus clinical and published papers, in each case in human consumption, safety, and what, of course, you gentlemen are very familiar with, LD50. I mean, it's hard to achieve this, toxic dose in animal trials. So safe is a number one priority, and it is incredibly safe.
So what about BDNF?
Oh, yeah, BDNF, yeah. So I spoke briefly about neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, and the neurotrophins, NFL, neurofilament light, but BDNF is probably the most important neurotrophin to know about, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So it's an acronym that stands for the production of that particular neurohormone. And it's responsible essentially for new nerve growth and nerve connectivity. So it's responsible essentially for neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. In fact, there's also a gene called BDNF, and that's responsible for how well each of us individually do this. Good news is, regardless as to the variation genetically that you might have of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, we can improve it. We can boost it. And DHA is one of those things. So there's a bunch of other ingredients. We talked a little bit about diet and lifestyle things that you can do to boost all that. But one of the most potent, safe, and effective ways to do it is to, literally arm your brain. Brain armor, DHA to EPA, that ratio of 2 to 1 is boosting BDNF. And that's what you want for a very, very healthy brain. I call it brain span. So brain span is a term that I hope will get more popular out there, where lifespan is how long you live. Health span, we've become more recently understanding the idea of living longer well, so improving quality of life over our lifespan. But brain span, I hope we can focus on that, because living longer well with optimal cognitive faculty, so our brain working at optimal state to the end of our life, I think that's the optimal quality of life.
So, Bryce, what about nerve cells? Can we grow new nerve cells or brain connections?
Oh, yeah. So the best information that came down the pipe in the last less than a decade, in fact, it's really only been the last few years, neuroscientists have realized that we can grow new neurons and new nerve cells. We don't do that in astronomical numbers. You mentioned in the top, in the intro, we've got 86 billion neurons. We're only doing a few thousand more a day. So, and that's only if you're treating your brain right by taking things like brain armor and engaging in a healthy diet and exercise. But the fact of the matter is, certain regions in our brain, in particular the hippocampus, where we form memories and consolidate memories at night when we sleep well, in other parts of our brain, we can grow new neurons and new nerve cells when we treat our brain well. That's the bottom line.
treat our brain well. Okay. Clarify that.
Anything you can do to boost that neurogenesis, the neuroplasticity, the BDNF. So, we talked a little bit about it earlier on, taking saunas every day, engaging in high-intensity exercises like HIIT training, cardiovascular exercise, improving social networks, drinking green tea, thinking about ingredients like curcumin from turmeric, more spices in your diet, and, of course, taking brain armor. Literally consuming that daily is improving your brain health and growing new nerve cells.
I understand you're working with professional athletes on with brain armor. What's going on?
Yeah, so we continue to work with the NFL alumni, NFL. I see a lot of NHL players in a clinical practice. Brain Armor's working with rugby players, a whole host of pro sport groups. For the original athlete study group that we did, the average baseline of that omega-3 index I was telling you guys about, it was just over 5.5. And over 90-day supplementation, there were all kinds of amazing changes in outcome measures with an average increase of omega-3 index to 65.8%, and an average decrease of omega-6 to 3, that ratio of 35%, and an average decrease of inflammation index, arachidonic acid to EPA, of 51%. So these results are just amazing. But by the end of this study, it was just, above and beyond our greatest expectations. And of course, their anecdote, their feedback individually is their game had improved. They all felt better. You don't think about this product necessarily as something that you would experience, but they did. They experienced change. They experienced improvement. They were sharper, focused, more attentive, more alert, and we couldn't have been happier. I know it's sometimes hard to come across a great pharmacy or pharmacist, Brad, and although I haven't been foot in there, so boots on the ground, I really hope that folks get into the Medicine Center pharmacy where they can have this experience. I really encourage your listeners to purchase this Brain Armor Starter Kit where they can experience the same thing as these pro athletes. This consists, of course, of 2 omega-3 index kits and then a 40-day intervention. And, just like we supply over 35% of pro teams in North America and all kinds of the NCAA programs and, again, NFL alumni, folks can experience the same thing as what we saw with our pro athletes. So get yourselves into the medicine pharmacy, purchase the Brain Armor kit with the omega-3 indexes, and get your own. This is basically like doing your own mini living brain project for yourself. And I hope that everyone can experience it for themselves.
What about the difference between men and women? Is there anything?
Yeah, especially so. That's a great question. So, especially if they're relying on a diet alone, us guys are going to suffer in that conversion of omega-3 alpha-linoleic acid, ALA, into the downstream that we need more of. So, but the contrast, and this is also what's interesting, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, that is much more of a female predisposition. That has something to do with hormones, not just neurotrophins, but sex steroidal hormones. So they're more predisposed to Alzheimer's cognitive decline. I'm just going to come right in the middle and say, regardless as to your gender, regardless as to your age, this is for all stages and all ages. It's mainly a difference of dosing. Everyone at every stage of life should be taking Brain Armor, and ultimately increasing what I alluded to, which was brain span, putting more years on your life, but with optimum cognitive faculty, optimum brain function.
How about dosing? Difference from children to adults?
There is. Yeah, so our formula is made with a 2-to-1 ratio in mind of DHA to EPA. So the youth formula is just a lower amount of that overall ratio and a lower amount. We also include vitamin D3 in our formulas. We've got vitamin E, which are great add-ons. Of course, we're in North America low in those two things as well. They've got co-benefit. We put in our formula medium chain triglycerides, or MCTs, basically extract of coconut oil. And so that combination, it's a twice-a-day dosing schedule. That's the optimum anyway. It's just a lower fraction or concentration of the overall DHA to EPA for youth, and then, of course, a much higher concentration the way we go up from there to adult and then from there to pro. So it's just a dosing consideration.
Bryce, I'm sorry we're out of time. Bryce Wylde from Brain Armor. Special thank you to our sponsor, Studio Arts and Glass, Mercy Medical Center, and our technical producer, J.D. DeAngelis. If you have a medical condition, please consult your healthcare professional for guidance. As always, thank you, listeners, for joining us on Health Matters with the Medicine Center Pharmacy.